Hello everyone, this is Ketshi1383 with Ketshi Gaming. For part 2 of my Tears of the Kingdom commentary slash review, I thought I would cover the story. The story of Tears of the Kingdom does not start the same way Zelda games have started since A Link to the Past, with Link waking up. Instead, it takes place 7 years after the events of Breath of the Wild, with Link and Zelda descending into a series of hallways and chambers underneath Castle Hyrule. They eventually come across a mural depicting the imprisoning war. This sounded familiar to me, and I could not recall, but I thought it was somewhere in Link to the Past. So before writing the script, I pulled out the Hyrule Historia circa 2012. And after looking at the Zelda timeline again, I went to the part that covered A Link to the Past and found nothing. So then I pulled out the Legend of Zelda Encyclopedia and found nothing again. After that, I was a bit baffled and just Googled it and found an entry on the Legend of Zelda wiki. So basically, they are two different events with the same name. But the imprisoning war from The Link to the Past was a reference to the events in Ocarina of Time, where in one timeline, Ganon was sealed away. I have a bit of a hypothesis about this, and we'll cover it later. With that bit of background out of the way, back to Tears of the Kingdom. Link and Zelda come across Ganondorf in an apparent state of decay. When he starts to reanimate after a stone falls from the arm holding him in place, he mentions Rauru. So again, I thought it was linked to the Sage of Light from the Ocarina of Time. He attacks Zelda and Link steps in to protect her, and the Master Sword is shattered, and his arm is severely injured, losing all of his hearts, similar to that of Samus in the Metroid series. After being transported by the arm, Link is then awakened by a voice, and it is that of a ghost of a humanoid-looking cat? Or at least he looks like a cat? I'm not sure. This is Rauru, the first king of Hyrule. The game sort of continues with the tradition of Link waking up when he notices his arm is missing and replaced by the arm that was holding Ganondorf in place, having been attached to Link after Rauru removed it due to the injury. This raises some questions. Like, how did a ghost remove Link's arm, or how did the arm change size to match Link's proportions? I felt that was a bit overly detailed, but due to the events that took place, it was necessary. With all that, let's back up to the Hyrule Historia and Encyclopedia and look at the convoluted timelines. So there are 3 branches after the Ocarina of Time, and I sort of wondered where Breath of the Wild takes place in this amalgamation, and I have no idea if there was an official announcement or canon release by Nintendo or through an interview. To be honest, it feels like its own brand new timeline, completely separate from the other games. There are definite influences from the other Zelda games that came before Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and some might point to the various names, locations, and items in the game as proof that they are in the same timeline. I would counter that most of these items, names, and locations are nothing more than homages to the previous games. The obvious influence comes from the Ocarina of Time and the 7 Sages, with the Sage of Shadow being a no-show in Tears, although there may be DLC for that. But I was thinking of both Breath of the Wild and Tears as a whole. My hypothesis is that both draw from Skyward Sword. You have Ganondorf, the king of the demons, being very similar to that of Demise, being imprisoned. Then over time, his essence or power leaks out enough, taking the form of Calamity Ganon, similar to how the imprisoned gets out in Skyward Sword. And where does Calamity Ganon arise from? Beneath Hyrule Castle. It eventually comes to a head when Ganondorf can no longer be held prisoner, and he is freed. This is kind of similar since Demise was freed in the past after getting turned into pulp in the future. I talked about that whole time travel thing in my Skyward Sword review. In either case, the Demon King is revived. Now, I wanted to cover what I said about the story being a bit derivative. Personally, it felt a bit formulaic with Breath of the Wild being used as a model. It started out with Link in the starting area, the Great Plateau, and the Great Sky Island. Complete the first 4 shrines while a ghost of a dead Hylian king follows you around, and then Link gets the glider. For the main story, Link goes to the 4 other races, meets up with a champion of said race who helps Link get to the dungeon. I suppose the story in The Legend of Zelda have always been a bit formulaic, with Ocarina of Time through Skyward Sword having very similar storylines, but there are nuances between them, and the same can be said for Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. But for the 5 Sages quests follow an almost identical quest line with very similar dialogue when each champion speaks to the sage of the past. Tulin's quest, though, feels especially derivative. You use Tulin's ability to get to a large ship that has several big guns on it, kind of like Teba in Breath of the Wild flying Link up to a flying ship that has several big guns on it. Again, there are differences between the two, and I will admit I was painting it with a broad brush. The point is, it feels like they have a basic formula, and then they alter it to go with the game mechanics, but still hit major plot points. Let's talk about the dragon tears found around Hyrule, similar to that of Link regaining his memories in Breath of the Wild, revealing what happened to Zelda after she disappeared while falling. If you find all the tears, it kinda ruins part of the main story and some quest. For instance, investigating the various sightings of Zelda, fully well knowing none of them are Zelda. The same is true for the sightings of Zelda with each of the champions. It detracts from the story, especially when Link has seen all the memories and he does not say a thing to any of the champions and the obvious trap it is. Not to mention, after the first sage, maybe saying something to whoever he is with about becoming a sage. Link saw the same vision after all. After awakening the 4 sages, they realized there was a 6th sage, Minoru, Raru's sister, and Sage of Spirit. Finding Minoru and getting her a body was a bit of a clever way of adding a 5th dungeon hidden in plain sight. It then accumulates in the obvious showdown with Ganondorf. Again, you can find him under Hyrule Castle, just like Calamity Ganon in Breath of the Wild. I was very pleased that Link gets to fight Ganondorf in his Gerudo form before turning into the Demon King. Although Ganondorf is not the same as Demise from Skyward Sword, he has a very similar appearance. Just look at Demise, now look at Ganondorf. Demise is clearly an inspiration for Ganondorf's design, and while writing this, I kind of came up with a thought in regards to Ganondorf, that he is the 7th sage, the Sage of Shadow. After all, he is responsible for the gloom, and he likes it down in the dark. So I will issue a bit of a spoiler alert for this next part. So to avoid this next part, skip to the timestamp. After fighting through the various stages of Ganondorf, he becomes desperate, fully well knowing he has lost, and he swallows his secret stone. From the memories of the Light Dragon, this is part of a process called dragonification. He turns into the Demon Dragon. The question I have is, how did he know about dragonification when he has been imprisoned for who knows how long? After the battle with the dragon, Rauru and Sonia's ghost revert the Dragon of Light back to Zelda, and Link's arm is restored. My question is, why is his shirt gone? Then Link has to dive after Zelda. I got to this part and had to step away and did not hit the home button in my haste, so Link fell for 17 minutes. And when I came back, Zelda was gone and Link was perpetually falling. I have no idea if I could get to Zelda. After trying for several minutes, I gave up and fought Ganondorf again. Link ends up catching her and landing in the same pond did when he jumped off the Great Sky Island. This brings me to the last part. Where do you go from here? Nintendo used Ganon already, and now Ganondorf. I suppose I could use them again, but there are other villains they could use, like Vaati or Majora, or even new ones. Nintendo can revisit Link turning into members of the other races. After all, there are 8 ghosts of former champions slash sages, as well as 2 members of the Zonai race. Nintendo could even use Ganondorf for the Gerudo, adding an interesting dynamic to the mix since male Gerudo are only born once every 100 years. Before anyone accuses me of encouraging brownface, look at the female Gerudo, and there is no shortage of skin tones amongst them. Nintendo, let alone the Zelda games, are not known for their deep, complicated stories, and put more focus on gameplay, and it shows. Like I said, it feels a bit formulaic following key plot points from Breath of the Wild. It is serviceable, good enough to want to complete it. It is not at all complex or deep, which is par for the course when it comes to Nintendo in general. With all that said, if you made it this far, thanks for watching.